You're listening to the Valley Current.
Welcome into the Valley Current, Dr. Leonard Hayflick. We're subject to Zoom's higher security levels that they've imposed on video conferencing because they've had too many people break into too many meetings. Because if you have the meeting number with no password, then you can get in, and people have been coming in, barging in. They call it Zoom bombing. So now what they do is they put you in a waiting room, and in the waiting room, you wait to get identified, and then people let you in, kind of like having a ticket before you can get into the movie theater kind of thing.
Okay.
There you go. Good. Okay, so you hear what I'm saying about the new security methods that they're using.
Yes, I had read about that, I think.
So welcome in. We were talking about kind of the scientific approach and what's happened over the years, and maybe the lead in I should just spend a few minutes on is I see a big cultural shift from the way I remember things back in the 1960s, even and 1970s, and even 80s, when people that were scientists did not think instantly initially of patenting. They thought of publishing. Your work was to get the word out and to increase the store of knowledge. Somewhere at some point, and it changes, and you could argue it may be in the 80s, it might be earlier, it might be based on what the U.S. Supreme Court is doing or not doing in areas like biotech, in areas like computer software, fintech. I could go through a whole list of areas that the Supreme Court has zigzagged around. Software is patentable, it isn't patentable, biological tissue is patentable, it's not patentable. They zigzag a lot. And I think historically, this is my observation, it could be wrong, many people did not, when they got a PhD, they thought of their life as research for the benefit of science. And the goal was the Nobel Prize or something like it, or recognition. The goal was not to assemble a portfolio of patents. I think today it's completely the other way, which is the goal is to get to the patent office first, and then once you really know that you're there and you got your filing date, and then maybe you might publish, but if you publish, you might even leave some things out that are viewed as somewhat secret or proprietary or somehow valuable for maybe the next patent or the next patent or the next patent. And we've got a patent office that sometimes people, I know some individual inventors have like 100, 200, 300, 500 patents. And you're amazed about that. But I'm curious if you can make an observation, because you're one of the most esteemed scientists that I know, which the world knows, and you're in your 90s. So you've traversed really what might be called the era of what I'm talking about, and then maybe some even beyond that. Because if you go back in time, even to like pre-World War II, maybe it was different then than post-World War II. I mean, I don't know. You want to make an observation about that generally?
Yes, well, your description of those years and my experience is essentially accurate. And it was a very unusual experience, because when I began my work to earn a master's degree and a PhD in biology, and up until the time that I did a postdoctoral position at the University of Texas in Galveston with one of the world's leading cell culturists, and then accepted the job at the Wistar Institute in 1958.
In Philadelphia, right? In Philadelphia, right?
Philadelphia, correct, yes. And until 1958, I was persuaded to believe, as all of my colleagues seemed to believe, that none of us were in any capacity of research in order to have some financial gain. The purpose was a mixture, I think it's fair to say, of curiosity about specific biological problems that I and others were interested in. And the long range was perhaps it could benefit society in general in respect to the elimination of disease or the resolution of diseases. That was the mixture of motivations at that time. In fact, I remember one significant incident when I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, when one of the professors in the Department of Medical Microbiology invented a cap for a test tube, which up until then, test tubes contained agar medium with bacteria, and they were plugged with a cotton plug.
Right.
This professor invented a stainless steel closure that fit over the top of the test tube, and it had several critical advantages that I won't go into now, it's not necessary. Well, he was hired as a consultant to a company to manufacture those enclosures. And of course, he was paid for that. And when we students learned about this, we were stunned that a professor in microbiology should be earning money on an invention that was very hard for us to believe.
Well, it was like the professor taking a role at a shoe shine stand, shining shoes, right? It was beneath him, right?
Well, this was something in his area of expertise. This wasn't distant from his, if it was distant from his area of expertise, then that's a different story. But this was part of his professional life.
So you thought it should be something the university got the benefit of? Is that your point?
Well, we didn't even think in those terms. To me, I'm talking on behalf of the graduate students
right.
who were in the department at that time. It was unheard of that a professor in a field of biology at that time would be gain some financial advantage over something that he or she discovered.
Yeah, but I'm trying to understand, was the reaction to it like a priest somehow getting money from a source that wasn't the Catholic Church, if you were talking about a Catholic priest? I'm trying to understand why you wouldn't think, hey, if he wants to go do some commercial activity, he gets to do it. What's wrong with that? I'm kind of curious. Is it just that we're not used to the idea of people making money in some adjacent way?
No, we're not. We in biology at that time were not, had no understanding at all of why a person in the field of biology would be gaining financially from something they discovered.
Oh, period. Like they should just have published it and given it to the world, right?
Correct.
Okay, good. All right, good. So we're on the same page, because today we're very close to Stanford University. You know, I also got an MBA from UC Berkeley, so we're very close to Berkeley. We have a big network of people in Berkeley. I also have an MBA from Columbia, a big network from Columbia. I get calls all the time from various professors at all three universities. Hey, I came up with something really valuable, and I don't want to publish because I want to file a patent first. And that's the mental mindset, which is 180 degrees what you're describing. It's completely the opposite, including the graduate students will often call and say, hey, I came up with something and I want to make sure I can protect it.
That's absolutely correct. And so I experienced the transition from what I just described as an anomaly to a universal experience. And I've discussed this in several of my articles, one of which ended by saying that if you do not belong to a scientific advisory board today, or are a founder of a new company that is looking for financial gain involving some kind of biological research or manufacture, you are a failure in your field. When I was starting my career, you had absolutely no feeling at all about that. It would never have entered your mind that you would have been had some financial gain. That is why the materials that I discovered, I gave actually to the world. I distributed a normal human cell strain for vaccine production to every biological vaccine manufacturer worldwide gratis. And they have made billions. It's not an exaggeration. I can provide proper reference.
No, I'm sure it's more than billions.
Manufacturers have made billions of dollars from human virus vaccines produced in the cell strain that I gave to the manufacturers gratis. Well, the turn came when I was hired at the Wistar Institute in 1958. And the director of the Institute came directly to that position from his position at a pharmaceutical company. And so his mind was more prepared for financial gain than certainly mine was. And it was during those years at the Wistar Institute that I began to realize and actually see other people becoming financially rewarded as a result of their biological research activities. I won't go into all the details, right. But it ultimately ended when my cells that I gave freely to any scientist who asked for them, including these two scientists at the Wistar Institute who I gifted the cell strain to, and they ultimately patented the use of my cell strain for the production of a rabies vaccine and a rubella, German measles vaccine, both of which were enormously successful and became so by both of those people who did not include me in the patents.
Which they probably should have, and which good or best patent practices would have said the patent lawyer who drafted those patents, or lawyers who drafted those patents, the patent application, should have called you and said, hey, I could see that you're associated with WI-38. What role did you play, if any? What role could you have played? And so on. And let me just make a point about this. I think that today's world is really different in the sense that people actually guard that information and they don't give it away until they get appropriate agreements, which I think might to some degree potentially retard the scientific process, even though the patent system supposedly is meant to incentivize the process. A lot of stuff is still kept secret because people worry that if they don't have a hook, and if the patent system doesn't work or the ethical system of being fair doesn't work, knowing what you know today, I'm not sure you would have given away WI-38. I think you might have said, wait a minute, I got to talk to a lawyer first. I got to find out what kind of agreements we need to get because I'm willing to be fair, but you have to be fair back. Well, and that would have been benefited you and benefited Wistar in a big, big picture kind of way.
Well, one key concept is that WI-38 and any other living cell population or cell at all could not be patented when I made this discovery.
Well, it could not be patented under the then existing law, but people were starting to push the boundaries, and the zealous advocates that were pushing the boundaries were giving a glimmer of hope to their biological inventors, saying, we may not be there with this case, but if we push enough and push enough and push enough and are persistent enough, we will get the court to realize there is invention here and there's discovery, and things can be patented when there's invention and discovery of things that are novel and non-obvious, period, full stop. Don't even draw the line any further than that. I mean, laws of nature cannot be patented. But things that are discovered that happen to operate in the laws of nature can be and are routinely patented. And this fight continues to go on to this day. And I want to relate it for a second to COVID-19, because there's an unbelievable number of patents that are being filed that have COVID. I mean, I can't tell you, someone's going to have to build a patent reporting and a patent litigation reporting system on everything that comes out of COVID-19. And if we have a relapse or a new wave that we're going to talk about maybe next week, COVID-20. What really plays out when all of this IP is claimed? Is the knowledge being extended or is the knowledge being constrained? Because WI 38, you were gracious enough to give in so many ways, produced a lot of stuff that saved lives, maybe saved millions of lives, maybe saved, more lives than we could ever know the exact number for. I'm not sure that would have played out if you took the proprietary view. I'm not sure it would have played out the same way. I'm not sure it would have played out in saving as many lives. Of course, if you lose one life, you would say, well, maybe the patent system costs too much. Maybe even one life gone. That could have been an Einstein who changed the world, that one life. Who knows? But the point is that culture changed. And the culture for you was very much what might be called the traditional culture. And the culture changed somewhere in this. But I don't think it changed for you. I think you still give away everything that you ever discover and everything you see and everything that your critical mind applies its critical faculties to. And that's really what I want to get to, which is, are we retarding science because people are not willing to be as open and subject to criticism as Karl Popper would say we all should be? Is there sort of a retardation there?
Well, first of all, let me say that in respect to the patents from the Wistar Institute that used my WI 38 cell strains and provided to the patents the key points that allowed for the patents in the first place. WI 38 is mentioned in the first paragraph of each of the patents. And as you properly indicated, I was never contacted by a patent department official, so that went by the boards. But my publications, contrary to what happens today, my publications contain every element of my discovery. Nothing was held back, and that has been the history of everything that I've ever published. As you properly point out, the evolution of the motivation for financial gain in biology has come to the point where, as you indicate as well, people keep back what they intend to publish until a patent is granted or at least applied for. And the motivation today is not directly to help people gain better health, but to gain financially. And that's a huge shift in a biologist's feeling about why they're conducting research. It all came about, actually, and I went through all of this, with the discovery of recombinant DNA technology and the birth of the major pharmaceutical companies that were derivative of that discovery. In particular, Cetus, Genentech, can't think of the name of the company in Southern California, another major player who's still in business. Those companies benefited from something else that has to be clearly understood that hasn't been mentioned yet. And that is, if you had used research funds obtained from, let's say, the National Institute of Health to produce something that would financially benefit you, let's say a vaccine even, you could not exploit that because the research funds that you received and you used for that purpose were taxpayers' funds. And if you use taxpayers' funds to discover something that was financially attractive to manufacturers, you could not exploit that because it was not owned by you. However, after the recombinant DNA technology resulted in the birth of these companies that I mentioned and several more, it became apparent that the thinking changed significantly. So that during the Reagan administration, Reagan established an executive order that permitted manufacturers and scientists themselves to benefit from research that they conducted using taxpayers' grant funds, and that turned out to have financial benefit to them and to manufacturers. That then became redone in the form of legislation. I can't think of the name of the legislation now, the Bayh-Dole Act.
Bayh-Dole Act, yeah.
Bayh-Dole
I think
Act.
you were thinking of Shire, Shire in Southern California, the biotech company Shire.
No, this one, no, this is, it's well known. I'm sorry, I can't think of it.
Oh, it's okay. We'll figure it out. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious when you think about the consequences, because I remember having a case, gosh, it's got to be almost 15 plus years ago. I had a case for a professor at UCSF. I think it was UCSF. I'm pretty sure it was UCSF. And she had a bunch of biological materials and she wanted to come over to Stanford. She was a full professor at UCSF, tenured, and she just got a better offer from Stanford. So of course she wanted to take her biological materials over. And, we're in 15 years ago, we're in this new regime, because the new regime changed, I want to say, in the 1980s. We'll talk about in a minute when it changed and when I think it changed. And we're talking maybe 2004, 2005, 15 years ago. And they tried to block her from taking her biological materials, claiming the university owned all of that material, what might be called the, work product of her lab, even though the lab was really moving with her to Stanford. And Stanford and UCSF couldn't work out what the deal should be of any fruits that came from that effort. And of course, she was like, look, I'm just trying to do research. I don't really want to file patents. I'm not a proprietary rights person. I publish. She took the old time view that you're expressing. And they were like, hey, man.
Tune in next on The Valley Current.